Okay, it's going to be webdevstudent.me. Isn't that a cute name? /cpanel. Okay, so I'll post that in our chat. Okay. So again, those of you who have contacted me and I have set up an account for, there is webdevstudent.me. Some of you have fastcomet.com servers, and you can access your cPanel through the client login area here at the top. Okay. I have several Fast Comet accounts as well, but this is how you would access your control panel. All right, so I'm going to walk you through this. This is the important part, is making sure you can get into your cPanel. So this is why I want to do this first, because if you can't get into your cPanel, we're going to have to figure something out. So you're going to log in with the username that I gave you. And I got to figure out what my username is. And the password I gave you. And remember, everything is case sensitive when it comes to web servers. So if you have logged in properly to your control panel through the URL I gave you, you should see something that looks like this. If you log in through Fast Comet, you'll see something that looks like all of this information, and then you access this little cPanel logo right here, and then you'll have to put in your password to get into it, and then you should be brought to a page that looks something like this. It's going to look a little different, but the basic idea is there. So if you are successfully able to log into your cPanel account, can you put a X in the window in the chat? I love seeing the X's. Thank you guys for coming to class prepared. This is really going to make this a lot easier. David, you had to have set up a web server and read my announcements that I've been sending out all week. I don't think I've heard from you. So if you don't have a web server set up, then you're going to have to go back to those announcements and set yours up at some point. Okay. All right. So David, read the announcements, and then you can send me a message if you want to go through the process of me setting you a web server account up. I would need to do that on our little break though. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the learning resources for this week. And this is kind of, these next 2 weeks is kind of like a crash course into the COSP 38 class. But I know that the current class, you guys are using Oracle, right?
Yeah, we're doing Oracle Academy.
Okay. So John and I teach the class a little differently. But so MySQL has a very long history as a database, as a free database, an open source database. So when PHP first came around, PHP and MySQL worked very well together because they were both free open source server programs, and people like free, right? We like free because the competitors like Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle, even worse, those are considered like enterprise level systems. So Oracle is what runs the LBCC college database. So every time you log in, to PeopleSoft, which is the Viking, student service. That is all Oracle database. It's very secure, very robust. You can do a lot with it, and it runs, very, very large companies' data. SQL Server by Microsoft has a few different levels. They do have a more of a entry level type business system that maybe costs $3,000 a year for licensing or something like that, which is more reasonable than the $50,000 you're paying for Oracle every year. So SQL Server is a very popular database to use for smaller type businesses, and many websites are run with SQL Server because they just can't afford the amount of money that Oracle requires. So MySQL was a free open source system that has been through many iterations, and probably about 5 years ago, Oracle bought MySQL, and they promised to maintain it as a free system, and they just now are the owner of it. So nothing has really changed since they took over, but a lot of people now use something called MariaDB, which is basically kind of a clone of MySQL. And there's many other free databases out there, but these are the most popular ones that are used with PHP. Okay, any questions about the big three, I like to call them? How many of you have experienced working with MySQL or MariaDB ever in the past? Nobody?
Just from the video and the learning resources, I did that earlier today.
Okay, cool. All right. So, but if you want to do web, you're going to see a lot of websites use MySQL just because of, the fact that it's free. It's free, it's powerful, it can do most of the same things that SQL Server and Oracle can do. And there's lots of tools that you can use to support your database system. Okay, so let's take a quick run through for what is a database. So can you tell me how many of you have already taken COSP 38 or who are already in COSP 38? Why don't you give me just give me a Y if you're currently or have already taken COSP 38. So you guys are all SQL experts then. Is that what you're saying? Okay, so we'll go through the terminology pretty quick since it seems like some of you already know this. But basically, a database is, good. Yeah, Microsoft Access is definitely something that you can use to correlate the concepts, although Microsoft Access is definitely not enterprise level or even web level that we're talking about here. So a database is a structured collection of data that is stored in tables with rows and columns. So if you've used Excel, which I'm sure many of you have used Excel, it is kind of like that, except we have a very specific relationship between a column and the data that is stored in that column. Whereas Excel, you can pretty much put in whatever. In a database, it is structured and it relates specifically to one thing only. And that is very important for a relational database. There are other databases that are not relational databases that just basically are giant container of data, big data, and you might run into those in your career, but this class, we're not talking about big data, we're talking about relational data. So a database is organized so that it can be easily accessed, managed, and updated. An improperly organized database is a nightmare to maintain. And this is what sets you apart from other web developers. You are very, very valuable as a developer or a programmer if you have database knowledge. If you could properly set up a database, that is going to make you so much more valuable than someone that is just a programmer, okay? Because a lot of programmers don't really know how to do much with databases. So when I first started as a programmer, I was also kind of like a little junior database administrator. I was allowed to do things to our local databases, our testing databases. But when that information had to go live, then the big DBA would go through and just double check that everything looked good before they would go ahead and release that change to the live system. So I was designing things left and right, and I had several years of experience working with databases. So I kind of did that before I started the programming aspect, or sort of at the same time, I guess. I've been in charge of many in-house systems or software that has been dependent on a database that maybe existed over a 10-year cycle. And you can tell that maybe when the system was first set up, it was set up right. But then as programmers came in and kind of made changes, it just fell apart, and it's extremely hard to create queries or run reports on a database that is not properly set up. So, all right. So we have tables, and sometimes these things are referred to as entities. There's lots of different names for the same things in the database world. There are indexes, and indexes are basically, it's kind of like if I had a list of, let's just say I have a list of 100 students, I can index that list multiple ways. So I might index that by the student's last name, and I might index that by the student ID number. And what that does is it's basically storing the order of those rows or records of data for easy retrieval. So that's what an index is. There are stored procedures, which are little mini programs that can do things typically to clean up data. And then there are views, and views are kind of like a read-only copy of a database table. And those come in handy if, like, let's say you have a human resources data that you're storing. Maybe somebody has to work with the human resource information, but you don't want them to have access to secure personnel information, social security numbers, or salary or things like that. So you can create a view to give them access to the data, but not all of the data. Okay, so an entity or a table in the system, I say that it represents a noun. So for example, if you think about a system that has, I always use like a student registration system as my fallback example. But if I have a student registration system, what are some of the nouns that you might need to store data about for like a college registration system? Can you think of a couple? Okay, so definitely information about the student. Can you think of, so I want you to think more higher level. You guys are all describing really great things, but these are not the higher level. These are more of the fields that are going to be in that table. So if one table is a student, what might another table be? Yes, courses and classes, right. That's exactly what I was wanting. So a student registration system in my mind has three major tables. One of them is a student, one of them is courses, and then one of them is basically the combining the student with the course or the section specifically that they want to enroll in. So in my mind, I see those three things. There are also other parts. There's like the faculty, there's different sections. So courses typically have classes and things like that. But the majority of the system is going to revolve around those three tables. And those represent real world things. And anything that can be a noun can be an entity. So that's how I see that in my head. Entities form the basis of a table. All right, so for example, we might have a user, a student, class, product. These are all different things that you might see depending on the system. Obviously, a product wouldn't be part of a student registration system, but that would be part of like an e-commerce site or something. Now, a table has columns and rows. So rows form a record of data in the table, and the columns are the fields. So all of those things that you guys just said, the student ID, name, major, email address, passwords, when they first enrolled, all of those things would be considered columns or fields that the record of data will contain. Okay, so columns or fields are attributes of an entity. So for example, I like to do this little activity. If my entity or my table is a user, I would say a sentence, a user has a student ID or a username or an email address or a phone number. So all of those things describe the user, and therefore they are attributes or columns or fields. Okay, so again, they're like three things to describe the same exact thing. So this is the part where students typically get confused when they're doing a database, is they aren't thinking about the relation between that higher level table and those attributes within that. So again, if we're doing a user table, all of those fields, first name, last name, email address, are attributes which become the column names within the table. So here's an example of this is clearly like a bookstore table. And every single row of data must be unique. That is a rule of the database table. So we use things to make things unique. Which field in this example makes each row of data unique? Basically forces that.
The ISBN number?
Right, the ISBN number is considered a primary key for this particular table because there shouldn't be any duplicates. Now, sometimes that is considered like a natural occurring primary key, but a lot of times we run our database tables with something that really has no purpose, and those are considered surrogate IDs, and things like a user ID or a class ID. Sometimes those are just, they don't really represent something like a social security number would, or a vehicle identification number. These things represent something to us, whereas the fact that you're student 0562222 at LBCC, that doesn't really mean much to you, other than, hey, that's my student ID that I have to log in with everywhere. All right, so we're going to play this little game. It's called, is this data or is this an attribute? So think about it. The attribute will be the column name or the field name, and the data will be what we store in that column name. So let's take an example. If I have something like a student ID and I show you the word student ID, is that going to be an attribute or is that going to be data?
Attribute.
And if I say something like 0567222, is that going to be an attribute or is that going to be data? Okay. All right. So you guys got it. So just go ahead and shout out if you have a mic or type this in the chat so you can play this little game. Okay. All right. Data or attribute?
Data.
Data.
Kids are smart. Okay. Data or attribute?
Data.
Data.
Yeah.
Okay. Good job. Data or attribute?
Attribute.
Attribute.
I can't get anything by you. Data or attribute?
Data.
Attribute.
Attribute.
Good job. I already did that one, so.
Data.
Data.
Attribute.
Okay, so it seems like you guys did pretty good on that. So good job. So understand that data is the stored information and that it is organized by columns that also specify the data type of the column. So similar to what we're doing with forms, where, we're saying, okay, this is a input type of email or input type of phone or input type of a number or a date or something like that. When we set up our database, we also have to specify the type of data. And that type of data allows us to kind of have some sort of quality control over what information is put in there. The address of LBCC is data because the attribute that it would go into would be something called address, or street address, and city, state. So anything that is specific to a particular item is data. Okay, so all right, let's play another game. This one's a little harder. Is it a table or is it an attribute? Okay, so this time a table will be something like the nouns like user, student, etc. And tables contain attributes in a parent-child relationship, whereas an attribute belongs to a table as part of a column or field. So let's go ahead and try this. Okay, so here's an example. A person has a social security ID. The person is the table and the social security ID is an attribute. Okay, here we go. So is this a table or an attribute?
Table.
Student is a table. First name, table or attribute?
Attribute.
Good job, attribute. Course, table or attribute?
Table.
I think it's an attribute.
Actually a table, but I guess it could be kind of confusing. But typically a course is going to have many different types of courses. You would not likely store a course as an attribute because you would then have something like, like right now, if you guys are taking 3 courses or something, we wouldn't typically repeat data as an attribute like that. We'll talk about how you can set that up though. Okay, book, table or attribute?
Table.
Table.
Yeah, book is a table. Birth date,
Attribute.
attribute, yes. All right. So keep practicing to improve your understanding of tables / entities. They're the same thing, attributes / column names, and data. So if you find yourself designing a table and you're listing the attributes, think about that sentence. So the noun, which should represent the table. So a course has a course number. A course has a name, right? So that is how you can see the relationship between whether it's a table or whether it's an attribute in most cases. Okay, any questions about that, the terminology?
Professor, I got a question on that specific. Earlier I asked about the address, which is specific. And from what I understood, I thought it was attribute, but here the course number is specific. Why wouldn't be the
Because
opposite? Right?
the table is not called course number. The table is called course, and it has an attribute of course number.
So the previously, the address is specific, but yet its attribute here, the course number is specific, yet it's an attribute. That's what confused me.
So the actual information, the 4901 Carson, that is data.
Yes, ma'am.
So that is data that will be stored into a column or field called address. So
Okay.
the attribute would be address. The name of the table could be, you know, college, I suppose, or something like that. And the data would be the actual specific address. With course would be the table that lists every single course that Long Beach City College has. So things like COSW 10 would be listed, COSW 20 would be listed. Those are course numbers. And the data would be the COSW 10, the attribute would be course number, the table would be course.
Thank you.
Sense?
Yes, thank you.
When you're first working with this type of data, it's easy to kind of mix these things up. And that's why I like to kind of do this sort of thing so that you can run through and see the difference between things. But as we start working with these tables, I like to think there's kind of like common database systems that many databases share. Something like something to represent people, whether that's students or users or members or clients. There's always something that's going to represent your people. And then there's always something that's going to represent your product, whatever the product is. And then there's a whole bunch of other tables that support those main tables. And it's important for you to recognize what those main tables are, and then you can kind of throw in the supporting tables as you need them. And okay, so let's take a look at SQL here. This week you have a SQL solo learn class, which is a good introduction into SQL. If you've already taken COSP 38, I'm going to assume that you know how to do basic SQL queries. As we get further along in the class and start working on our team projects, you might have a need to create a more complex SQL statement. But for the majority of what we're doing, if we design our tables right, we shouldn't have to have too many complex queries. Okay, so every table in a relational database should have a unique identifier called a primary key. So that is a rule. If you don't have a primary key, the system is going to be like, hey, there's a problem here. We can't have 2 rows of data that are exactly the same. So primary key or unique identifier is very important. The natural primary key, I mentioned that before. That's something like a social security number, a VIN number, and it's not usually recommended for a primary key because sometimes those things change. So for example, social security numbers, do they get recycled? Do we just keep growing them? So a lot of times we use that surrogate key, which will represent and force everything to be unique. So single table queries are a query with just one table that in the from clause. So every single SQL statement follows a sort of a rule here. The first part is select, and then we select the column names or the attributes from the table that we want to have represented in our query. So if I have a table of students, that might have, 25 fields or columns in it filled with data, and I might not need to have all that data. Maybe I just want to have a query give me like first, last name, email address, and the year they last registered for a class. So that would just be 4 items, 4 columns that I would want to have in my query. So the next line of select is from. So you're always going to want to have a from to designate the table that list of columns is coming from. So if I wanted just a list of email addresses, I could say something like select email address from student. And that's it. That will give me every single email address that is stored in the table. If I want to limit my search results or be more specific, I can include a search condition, which is a lot like an if statement. I could say something like, give me email addresses where the email address starts with a letter A, or give me the email addresses of students that have just started taking classes, that just registered for their first class. And then there's order by. Order by is which column do you want the results to be returned in? So if I have a first name, last name, and an email address, how might I want to organize or have that data returned to me? What are some possible options there with first name, last name, and email address? So yes, I might very well want it to be ordered by last name. Now, last I checked, there were probably about 40,000 student names in our database on campus. And that was probably about 6 years ago. So it's probably a lot larger now. So we'll just say 50,000. If I ordered a query like that with a last name, I'm gonna get a lot of the same last names. So I might want to organize it by last name and first name, just so that I can narrow that down. So you can have multiple columns that you're ordering it by. And then a limit is how many rows do I want? So maybe I only want the first, 50 or something like that. I could say limit 50. All right, so here's a simple select query. Select user ID, first name, last name from user. This is very simple. There's no ordering. This is just going to give it to you based on the way that it was put into the table, which is likely going to be in order by user ID. All right, I'm just going to go through this real quick because I want to make sure we have enough time to do all of our fun stuff. And you guys can look at the SQL stuff. There is a wild card, the select asterisk, which will basically return all of the columns for a particular table. So again, if I have 25 columns in this is going to give all of them to me. It might be tempting to do this so that you don't have to really think about it, but you don't want to necessarily return all that data, especially through our website application. So try to be specific unless it's a really small table. Okay, all right, what's the order by? Where clause, okay, I'm gonna stop. You guys again can go through these. How many are there? Where? Okay, you guys will get lots of practice with this, doing the solo alert assignment. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we're not going to use REPL. We're going to, now that we're working with databases, we need to be on a web server. We're going to install Visual Studio Code. So I will give you the link. It's right here, code.visualstudio.com. So go ahead and download the latest version. If you already have Visual Studio Code, go ahead and just double check that you have the latest version. And you can do that by opening up Visual Studio Code. Hold on. I gotta share my whole screen here. All right, so this is my Visual Studio Code. I'm sure I need to update it. You can go to help and check for updates. So if you already have this, oh, it's installing my update. So let's take 5 minutes and make sure you have your Visual Studio Code set up. If when you have it set up, please put an X in the window. And then David, if you want to, did you read the announcements?
Okay. So we're going to install an extension, and you can do that by clicking on the little blocks here in the corner. And we're looking for one called SFTP. So you can type that in there. And this top one from Liximomo should be your top choice. I already have it installed, but you can go ahead and click it and click the install. Should be somewhere around here. All right. Anybody stuck?
Oh, I'm still updating my Visual Studio Code. Sorry about that.
Okay.
My apologies. And thank you.
So make sure that you have a folder ready to work in on your desktop or somewhere on your computer that we're going to use for FTP.
Can you maybe explain that? Because I think a lot of people don't really know why they might want to do that.
Sure. So we're going to be creating and transferring files from our local machine up to the web server. So to do that, we can go to File and open. It's a bit different on Windows and Mac, but you still get the general idea. I'll do a desktop one, and you can do a new folder. Call it whatever you like. And this is where your files selected. This is where your files will live. So you start creating files here, and you'll be transferring files from here up to the web server. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit open. So now I have that file or that folder open in my VS Code. And you can see that here in your Explorer, which is this icon here. If you don't see it, click the little files to get your Explorer, and you can see that you're in that folder.
Okay, so can you just tell us again, you went up to file and then open folder to start the whole process?
Yeah, it's
And
different
then
on
you-
Mac than Windows, but yeah, file and open or open folder. Navigate to where you want it to be. So if you want on your desktop or documents folder, make a new one just for the start for right now, so that can be empty and have a fresh place to work from. So
Yes,
hit
and
new.
file management and organizing your files is a very important skill for web developers, because if you just throw these up in like a documents folder or something like that, you're going to end up having a bunch of different copies of things and you're not going to have the latest version. So it's best to create a folder for this class, and then within every single homework assignment, you're going to want to have a new folder. So it would be good to have a folder that represents this class and then a folder that represents lab 6, because we're going to be kind of like working with similar files. So you don't want to be doing something in week 6 and then in week 7 overwrite all of that work and you don't have a copy from week 6. Okay, so keep
Professor,
them
if someone
separate.
asked to record this, is it being recorded as part of the class?
This is being recorded,
Okay.
yes.
All right. So we all set? Everyone got their extension installed? You can put in some X's or guesses. Thank you.
Where do we save the extension? In this folder that we created, the FTP server?
It should have installed it by itself. Did they ask you to
Okay.
put it somewhere?
No, I was just making sure that there wasn't a specific place you wanted it.
No, the extension should go into some magical VS Code folder somewhere that we don't look at.
Okay.
All right. So now to set up our SFTP, we want to, if you're on a Mac, it's Command Shift P. If it's Windows, it's Control Shift P. And then you can type in SFTP. You see here, this first one, config.
Yeah.
Everyone click that. And you need to get a new file. This is just a JSON file that we're going to add in all of our information for our FTP server to go into.
Okay, this is very important, or you're not going to be able to FTP through VS Code.
Alex,
So-
can you go over that one more time? Because I just opened my Visual Code.
Sure, certainly. So go ahead and hold down either it's going to be Shift, Control for Windows, or Command for Mac, and then P. And then type in SFTP config, and then go ahead and click on that option there to get this file.
FTP, that's it?
SFTP, yeah. It should say colon config. It's
So
for the,
Alex, does this, because I was trying to do this on my other computer earlier, but I hadn't opened a folder. So is that why it didn't work? Because
Yeah,
this
'cause
is
it's-
associated with just this particular folder then?
correct, yeah. The settings for the FTP will be for this particular folder. It creates a folder here, a .VS Code folder, a hidden folder to store your JSON file in.
Gotcha. I have to put a little FYI out there. The storms that you guys had are now in my neighborhood, and it is lightning and thundering like crazy outside. So if I happen to disappear, I will be back as soon as I can, okay?
Awesome.
Yeah, this is
Lucky.
some pretty crazy lightning. I'm like.
It was
"What?"
fun.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
I got a little video.
Oh, no. Aaron just said that, which part?
He just moved into his new house in Everson. I don't know if you know where that is. 2 days ago.
Oh, okay.
Power is out. It's up by Bellingham.
Oh, yeah, that's just north of me. So hopefully, I mean, we usually do pretty good, but I'll let you know.
He just moved to like the middle of nowhere, like foot of a mountain.
Yeah. Okay, sorry for that little interruption. Please continue.
No, so is everyone on the same page so far?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So now we have to go to our control panel to get our information. So, but first let's look at our JSON file. So we have a name. This name can be whatever you want it to be. So we're naming the server, but that can
Can
be,
you make that
Is
font
it-
bigger? You guys have a control plus plus like we do. Ah, so much better. Thank you.
all right. Yeah, so we can change the first one name. It can be whatever we want. So localhost, this is going to be our address. So we'll look at that in a minute. Our protocol, we're going to do FTP, not SFTP. S is for secure. We're just doing regular FTP. And that means you got to change also the port to 21. So SFTP is 22 port, it's secure. 21, regular FTP is not secure. So those things have to be matched or else it won't work. Username, that should be the name that you used to log in to your backend. And then we'll get the path also in a moment. So I'll pause here and see how everyone's doing. Any questions?
How did you get all that text again? It was Control-Shift-P.
Control-Shift-P and then type in sftp:config.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
But you have to make sure you've opened a folder first.
Yeah.
Hey, Alex, I got sftp.json. Is that the
Yeah.
same thing?
That's the right file. That's the file. Yeah, that's the file name right here that we're in.
So
The username is your login to your webdev student.me account. Yes, it should be the same, Chris.
So there's no password because we have to put the password in when
So
connect?
we can, yeah, so we're gonna add a line to our JSON.
Oh, okay.
So after the username, to line 6 here, go ahead and hit enter for a new line and type in password. The same as above, syntax, and then your password
Don't forget the comma.
and the comma. There should be no red squigglies. It should be very happy and pleased. All right. So let's change out to our control panel. Are you all seeing this still?
Yep.
Slow down.
Okay.
Let's see.
How did you get there, Alex? Just press enter?
No, I just changed to I changed from VS Code. I changed to my browser. So however you do that, you can use your taskbar or Alt Tab just to go to your browser and open up your control panel.
This is why having a very large widescreen monitor is like a must for developers.
I got a 55-inch TV that I got hooked up with an H.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we need from this page then?
So just to verify, your username should be up here. So that's what's going to go into your username line, just to verify that. And then we want to look for the FTP info and also your path. So let's do the FTP part first. Did I pass it? Yeah, FTP accounts. So under files, FTP accounts, let's click that.
File.
Ooh,
And then scroll down to the special FTP accounts.
Ooh, special.
And we're going to click the one that's going to be your name, your username, not logs, just your username. And click this configure FTP client to get your information. And this popped up. So how are we doing so far?
pretty good.
Okay, cool. So we want to copy the FTP server. We're going to take that and go back to our VS Code and put that in the host.
Host?
The host.
Oh,
Host. Okay, the local host, you mean?
Yeah,
That was
replace
before, yeah,
localhost.
we're going to replace that with the actual address, yeah. So yeah, before it was localhost, we're going to switch it to your address. This is to your website. And go back to our page, back to our, and again, here are the ports, FTP 21, so that all should be the same. And then one more step just to verify what we're doing is check our file manager to get our home path. So click that. Typically, a lot of providers, they give you this public HTML as your home directory. So we're going to add that public underscore HTML into the VS Code
how?
under remote path. Did I hear a question?
Yes, I didn't catch what you
Yeah.
just did. Can
Yeah.
can you go over it, please?
Sure. So we're going to update the remote path here. Line 8 in your JSON. We're going to change this. So it's a slash by default. We're going to find our remote path to update this. And that path is going to be this main directory here, public HTML. So this is where all your files are going to go. So when you upload files, they're all going to go into this folder. This is the root directory of your website. Everything kind of starts from this point. So when you go to your site, it's going to serve the files from that particular folder. So you want that folder name and put that here in the remote path.
And that's, you get it from the server?
Yeah, it's in the, let's go back. So if you go back to your,
I'm very confused. You just put FTP on that line.
sorry, that was a mistake, yeah.
Okay.
So back to your file manager,
Okay,
back to all your, to your control panel,
file manager, okay,
click file manager.
okay. And then public HTML,
Yeah, so we're just verifying this is the right directory. So we're taking that information and we're going to put it here. And I put the wrong thing here. Thank you, Wendy, for. So you got to put a slash public HTML, and then another slash. Everyone on the web dev student should have the same setup as this. So line 8 should be the same for all of you guys.
Public.
Great.
All right. Let's go ahead and save it.
Where'd you save?
I just, there's a little button to close it on the tab.
Oh,
You can also do Control S to save it too.
Or you can do file save.
Yeah.
Can we make an index.html? Okay.
So if you're looking at your Explorer here, be sure to just to close up your directory so you're not seeing your JSON file anymore. So it's hidden away. And we'll do a new file. Use the icon here to do a new file. We'll call it index.html. This is a blank web page. And don't ever do this for real. We're just going to do a test. So make your, add some text to it. Go ahead and save it. File, save. And then we can do a right click on it and go to upload. And that should now be up on your site. Well, mine didn't work. I don't have the right password in mine, but you guys, it should all work.
Okay, so you got to do the upload because I've got this thing that says open editors and then the index.html and then I have the COSW30. So make sure you click the one under your folder, not the one that says open editor. Because I right clicked and there was no upload and I was like, what?
Oh, yeah.
So my screen shows more things than yours for some
Well,
reason.
actually, if in your JSON file, we should have auto save, upload on save. But just by saving it, it should upload by itself.
Nice. So right here, if you're still in the FTP thing down here, click on the little 3x3 to get back. So if you are here and you are in your cPanel, please place an X
oh,
in the chat.
dinosaur. There you are. Okay.
Okay. These next steps are very important to set up your database. If you have already read ahead through week 6 and set this up, then you don't have to set this up again. You can use the one you've already set up. But let's go ahead and do this step by step. So in order for us to have a database, we need to first create one. So you create one by going down to the database section in your cPanel. And if you want, you can drag these. You can drag it all the way up to the top if you want. You can reorganize this. Okay. And I'm going to click the dismiss here. All right, so what we want to do first is we want to go into this area that says MySQL databases. So everyone click into MySQL databases. It should look something along the lines of this. You're also going to want to have a piece of paper or a Word doc or something, Google Doc open to write this information down. The very first, yes? Is there a question?
No.
Okay. The very first thing that you're going to want to do is this first step, create new database. So we're going to go ahead and call this, let's call this Lab 6. Okay, Lab 6. And you'll notice that you have something you can't change in front of that. That should be your user name or part of your username. And that's going to be attached to everything. So I'm going to press the button, create database. These database names are case sensitive. So just be aware when you're recording what you named everything, that you're using the correct case. Okay, so you should get a green box that says added the database, and then we're going to go back. If you have added your database, put a 0 in the chat. I feel like we're playing tic-tac-toe.
X's
Okay.
and O's.
All right, excellent. All right, now that we have our database, we need to create a user. So you're going to do everything from this page. It's not the best user experience, but it'll do. So we're going to come down here to add new users. Okay, so what I want you to do down here is I want you to create a user called admin, ADMIN.
Professor, how do you create a database again? I try to do, I have no option to create it.
Right up here at the top.
I open my database, I don't, PHPMyAdmin, and I don't,
Nope, that's not where you're supposed to go. Got to follow these directions very carefully. From the home page, you're going to go to MySQL databases.
oh, okay, MySQL. Okay,
Okay. All right, so create a new database. That was step 1. Step 2, add new user. It's going to be admin, and then you create your own password. Make it whatever secure password you can come up with, but don't make it one of the passwords you use frequently for other things. I'm going to go ahead and put my password in here and write this password down. And then once you've passed the password strength, go ahead and click create user and then write that down. Write down a couple things. Write down the name of the database. Okay, so that's going to be, for me, it's Delaney_lab6. And then your username should be whatever your username is, _ADMIN, and then whatever your password is. Write that down. Remember, case sensitive. All right, so you should see a message that says you've successfully created a user. That's great. Now there's another step. So now we have a database and we have a user. We have to connect those. So again, all the way down to the bottom, you want to find add user to database. So you want to select your admin and you want to select your database, lab 6. And you want to click add. Now this is an important step. So we specified that this was an admin account. We will use this account to set up all of our future databases for this class. So I want this admin account to have all privileges at this point because I want to be able to use it in PHPMyAdmin to do everything I need to do. When we have a live website going, we want to have a user that doesn't have all of these specific privileges, because then if someone breaks into our database and they can do some pretty serious damage. So we're going to just create this admin account for today. I'm going to click make changes. So selected everything. And then you should see success. You have saved privileges on the database. Okay. So now you should see current databases. You should see lab 6 and you should see the admin username. If you are there, go ahead and press an X in the chat. A nice big X you got there, Wendy.
Just so excited.
Okay, so all we have done is we basically have ran a bunch of MySQL commands. So we can run these through a command line interface to MySQL, or we can do it through our cPanel. cPanel makes it a lot easier, especially as we're first using it. But just know that MySQL can be managed through a command line if you like command line interfaces. Once you
Hey,
are
hi,
at that, yes,
Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off, but could you right after you made the account with MySQL, can you go over like what's after that? I didn't get all that.
so you made the account
Yeah.
and then you're going to add the user to the database. Make sure you select your admin, select your lab 6 and click add, and make sure it has all privileges, and then click the button.
Okay.
Okay, now we're going to go back to our cPanel by clicking on the 3x3. At this point, we should be able to go into PHPMyAdmin, which is going to be the graphical user interface to our MySQL system. Yours will not have this test. That was one I did earlier today. So over here in the left-hand window, you will have all of your databases. Do not touch the information schema. That is all configuration and the files that MySQL uses. If you mess those up, you could cause some problems to your system. So what we want to do is we want to click on the name of our database. Let me zoom in. And once you click on it, you'll see a couple things. So take note across the top. It tells you your server is localhost, and this is a nice little breadcrumb path. And we are now in the database lab 6. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a table. Now, here's the deal. I like my tables named very specifically. There are lots of different ideas about how to create table names, but I would like you to indulge me by following my rule for this class, and then you're welcome to do what you want to do on your own from this point on. But I like my database tables to be all uppercase letters, and I like them to be singular nouns. So for example, I want to create a user table. Now, whoops. So I'm going to go into my little box here, my form, and type in user. The reason I like my database tables to be all uppercase is when I am programming, it's much easier for me to tell the difference between the table and the field name. So I think it's a good learning tool. And the thing with plural versus singular is really just kind of something that I see one record as one user in the database. So I like things to be singular. Some people like things to be plural. So that's not as important, as I really think it's a good idea to have these all uppercase for just the table name.
Oh, how did you get to the structure tab?
So I clicked on my database name, and then as soon as you're in here with the breadcrumb, it'll say no tables found and create table. You can also, I don't know why you wouldn't be on the structure tab, but you could always click on these if you needed to. Okay, before you click go, you need to think about how many columns or field names you want in our user table. So let me take a look and see what I suggested here in the assignment. Okay, so I said 7. So we're going to change this number from 4 to 7, and then we're going to click go. All right, now, again, this is not the best user experience, but we're going to make do with it. Now, the thing is, you have to be very careful, as you can leave something out and end up having to do a lot of work for yourself. So please pay attention. All right, the very first thing you want to do is put your mouse in this top corner, and this is going to be our first column name. These are all going to be lowercase letters because they're columns or fields. So we're going to start with user underscore ID. Can't really see the underscore. There you go. This is going to be an integer. This is also in step 6 of the week 6 learning resources. So if you want to follow along and just look at that, that's fine. What you want to do though, you want to scroll down. The user ID is going to be our primary key. So it's very important that we set this field up correctly or our system isn't going to work. You need to scroll down and click on this checkbox that says AI, and that stands for auto increment. Okay, so it's going to pull this thing up that says, hey, we want to add an index. Remember I told you an index was basically like a kind of like a little map that will order everything by this field. So you're just going to click go, and then I'm going to click the little null button. I don't want this to be an empty field, and I want the database to enforce that this is a required field. So yours should look something like this. It should say user ID, int is the type, nothing for length, default is none, collation is none, attributes is none, check null. This should say primary for index, and then AI should be checked. Okay. Now, don't do anything. Now we're going to go to fill in the next one. This is going to be email underscore address. It's going to be a varchar, and varchar stands for variable character. That means I have to set a length, and I'm going to set my email address to 50 characters. So what this means is, hey, allocate 50 characters. Someone could use up to 50 characters, but if they only have like 10 characters, then it's only going to be 10 characters. If they have 49 characters, the space will be 49 characters. The variable part means that I'm not going to take up a bunch of space in the database unless I have to, unless I actually have data for that. Okay, so I'm going to go, the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down and check the null. I don't want there to be any, I don't want that to be empty. Then I'm going to go down to password, and I'm going to put varchar 50, and same thing, null. Now I will tell you that this password field is not secure at this point. We'll talk about how to do that in the future. First name is going to be my next one. That's also varchar, and that's going to be 50. And I'm requiring that, so I'm going to put null. And then what do you think? Last name. Also going to be varchar 50. And I'm going to force that as null. And then I'm going to put in create date. So this is important. This is a little different than our other ones. As the database developer, you will want to track other information. So I want to know when this account was created so that I can do a report that says, you know, on this day, this many new members signed up. On this day, this many new members, you know, the busiest day of the week is Saturday, something like that. So what I want to do is I want this to be a type of timestamp. So it's under date and time, timestamp. And when I do that, I have to specify a default value. So if you come to the default, there's an option that says current timestamp. And then in order for this to force populate, I need to select the null. So what's going to happen is when I put in a new record of data, or when my web app puts in a new record of data, it's going to record the current timestamp on my web server. So if you're, you know, halfway around the world, this might not actually be accurate time for what's on your computer, but this is going to be the time that's on my web server. Any questions about that one? So again, that was type timestamp. Default is current time, and then the null is checked.
Ma'am, I got a question. I entered the first line, but and then it kicked me to a different, it's a weird screen. I cannot get back.
What does the screen look like?
It has table structure, relationship view, and all those stuff. Maybe
Okay.
because I press it and press enter, maybe?
Yeah, maybe you forced it to go. So I'll show you how to get rid of that, but you can just
Yeah,
wait.
I'm writing down what you put on there.
Okay, the last one is going to be last login. And this is where I'm going to track when my user last logged in. So every time they log in, like we've been building our forms, I want to track the date and time of that. And I am going to use my system to put this in. So I'm not going to have a default value, and I'm not going to force this field. Okay, so if you sign up and you never log back in again, I'll be able to know that, hey, this person hasn't been to my website. I can send them an annoying spam message that says, hey, we missed you. Come back. Okay. If yours looks like mine, and this is exactly what it is on the week 6 learning resources, and scroll down here and click save. Now this is important. You click save. If it brings you back to this page, you can click on the table, and now you will see that there is user ID, email, password, first name, last name, create date, login. What does your error say, Erin?
It says all parts of a primary key must be not null. If you need null in a key, use unique instead.
All right, so
It says I have null clicked, so user ID, type int, nothing, then null is checked, primary, and auto increment is also checked.
okay, so go ahead and take off the null part and see, does it let you go through? It looks like it changed mine.
Yes, and now it looks exactly like yours.
Okay.
Could you go back to your tables? I accidentally clicked back way too much before I was able to save.
I can't get back to that other than what you can see here.
Okay, perfect.
The form's gone.
Thank
But
God
the-
there's a video.
You got the
Did
video
you
and
hit
you got,
save to get there? Sorry.
what was that?
Did you hit save to get there, or did you hit preview sequel?
Save, yes.
Save. Okay.
So let's look at our breadcrumbs again. We should have server and then database and then table. So you can click on the database and you should see a list of your tables. Right now we only have one. Hank, what you want to do is you want to click drop. See
Drop?
this thing right here? It says drop. You want to
Yes.
drop the table, that will delete it. And then you can recreate the table.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
Okay.
you.
If you need to make changes or add fields or something like that, you can click structure for this particular table. And then you can come down here and it'll say, okay, I want to add another column. And you can even select where you want to put it. And then so let's say I want to add a column after last name. I can say one column. And then let's say I put in a user type. And I'm going to make this a single character. And I'm going to call them M for member. So what this is going to do is every time I add a record, it's going to put in an M for the user type. And I'm seeing this as M for member, A for admin. That will be my plan. And then, oh, sorry, I need to put in a length of 1. Now let's do the very exciting thing of adding our data to our table. What do you think?
Good.
Okay, to do that, you're going to make sure your breadcrumbs, you're on the table, and then you're going to click the insert. So your form should look like this. Now, you're not going to put anything in for user ID because the system's going to assign it yourself. You're going to put in your real email address and then just put in a fake password. And then you can put in your name. And that's all you're going to fill out. So just your email, a password, your first, last name, and then you're going to click go. Oh, data truncated for column last login. Okay, it does not like my last login. Last login. Okay. Hold on. So this is giving me a warning. It still looks like it ran my query. But now if I go back to the browse button, I should see my data in here. So here it assigned my user ID of 1. I got my email, my password, my first, last name, create date, and then nothing is there for last login, which is fine. All right. If you have your row of data and you're staring at it like me, put an O in the chat. A big O or a little O, depending on how you're feeling right now. Multiple O's, okay. All right, we'll give you guys some time to get this going, but the next step, guess what, is going to be to connect to our database and to pull this information out. So if you are still working on this, keep working on it. If you have your one record of data, I want you to go back to the insert and add 4 more records. So you'll see here, there's 2 forms, so you can put 2 people in at a time, and then just make sure to come down here and click the go at the bottom. So go ahead and put in 4 records of fake data. I like to center my data around a theme. I'm pretty partial to Marvel characters, which you probably realize through my examples. But, you know, if you want, there's some show that you like or some world you like, go ahead and put their information in. And you want to have records for 5 people.
Ma'am, I cannot drop that table for some reason. Every time I click drop, it said
What does it say?
It says you can't delete all column with alter table. Error number 1090. Error processing request 1090. You can't not delete all column with alter table.
All right, then go into structure And let's see what we can do here.
I'm in structure right now. And I'm trying to do it again.
Hold on, let me just create a fake table that I can delete, okay? I don't want to ruin my table I've got in here. All right, so I'm going to go back to the database. I'm going to create a new table. Come in here, put user ID and click save. Okay, so here is the table that I want to drop. Okay, so I'm going to drop it. Do you really want to destroy a complete table? Okay, it dropped.
You mind if I share my screen with you?
Sure. Hold on, let me pause this video. So I have added my people. I have 5 people in my database. Okay, so if you have 5 people in your database, go ahead and press an X in the chat.
Oh, everything hurts.
Okay, so it looks about like half of you are here. So I'll give you guys a few more minutes and then we'll move on to the next step.
Now I got a question. I didn't write the first line down. Was that user ID? Because I have to recreate the table.
The best thing to do is to go into our week 6 learning resources and just use this table
Okay.
as your guiding point. Okay, so then we did step 7. We inserted demo data
Okay.
and enter at least 5 rows of data, but your row with real information should be the first one.
Hey, Professor,
Mhm.
how you delete columns in the server thing?
So you want to try and be very careful because deleting columns can get you into a big mess. So if you have to delete something, you want to use your breadcrumbs at the top of the screen, click into the database, and then you'll see your list of tables. Go to structure, and then you can go to drop along the side here. But sometimes they won't let you drop things. And then you might need to just drop the entire table and start over. That's why this being a database administrator is very attention to detail kind of work. And you always want to be careful when you're in here setting these things up and making changes. And we want to stay out of the database as much as we can and let our code work with the database so that we're making sure that we're not making mistakes. Okay. Okay. If you are not yet caught up to where we are, all of these instructions are in the week 6 learning resources. There's videos. There will be this video posted. And we will save 20 minutes at the end of the class to help people who might be stuck. Okay, but I want to continue on for.
Quick question, you had eight lines on your structure, but I have 7. What did I miss?
I added a user type, but you don't have to do that. Okay, so next step. The next step is we're going to create our first file. So if you were able to get your VS Code working, then you guys can do this in VS Code. But if you haven't got VS Code working, I'll show you the workaround. All right, so the first thing is find your cPanel tab. Should still be open somewhere. And what we want to do is we're going to scroll down to where it says Files and File Manager. So this can be used by people so you can kind of see where things are at here. Everything on our website typically is going to be in a public underscore HTML directory. Some web servers just put this elsewhere or put it in HTTP docs, depending on the web server. But these web servers are typically using Apache, and they kind of set everything up this way. There's no need for you to go into any of these other folders at this point. You want to go into public underscore HTML, and you'll see on the file manager, it's highlighted in bold. And here is the index.html that I created an hour ago. And everything looks good. One thing to note, if you're using the VS Code, Alex, does it give you a warning if you're uploading to a file that already exists, or will it just overwrite that file?
Nope, overwrite.
Okay, so this is very important, and very important that you set your folders up correctly, because if you have an index.php and you overwrite an existing index.php, you could lose all of your code. The other thing is back up your code. Okay, so if you're developing locally on your computer, back it up so you have a copy, and then upload these files to your web server. But keep a backup of your file somewhere else too. Okay, that way if you have to restore a file or you accidentally overwrite something, you can fix it. Okay, so the next step that we want to do is we want to build a connection file for our database. Now, I'm going to do this in our public underscore HTML folder, but if this was a real site, I would want to secure this information in a folder that wasn't accessible to the public. So keep that in mind, that this is not the best way. This is just a quick way for us to test our connection. All right, so if you don't have VS Code, come here and in public underscore HTML and click up here that says plus file and call this, I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but normally, what do I tell you to do it as? If I don't have that here, I think the book tells us to call it like, I'm just going to call it db.php. Okay, db.php. It's going to be in public underscore HTML. I'm going to click create new file. You'll see it here. It'll be 0 bytes. Then I'm going to right click on it, and I am going to edit this file. And I'm going to edit this file. And this is really ugly, and I don't recommend that you code using this window. This is for people who don't have VS Studio working. So what you want to do is you want to grab this bit of code from the week 6, copy it, and paste it in here. And I want to show you what this is. This is basically a little connection file. And this is very similar to that config file that Alex walked you through. And this needs some changes. I actually have an error here on line 13, but a couple of things here. These are config files. Our host is 127.0.0.1, which is your home, your local host. No need to change that. If you were using an off-site database, then you would change that host. But typically web servers don't allow you to connect from other servers. All right, your username. This is your database username. That one we created. Remember that I told you to write down? This is where you're going to put that. So mine was Delaney_lab. Oh wait, admin. Delaney admin. And then I'm going to put my password in here momentarily. You put your password in that you wrote down. Just make sure to put the closing quote because I deleted that somehow. Then your database. This is going to be your database name that we wrote down. Again, mine is Delaney Lab 6. And then the port is always going to be 3306. So what happens is we got all this information. We're going to require this file on every single page that has a database component. This file, we have a little testing thing here that basically says create a connection to our database. And if there's an error on line 22, output the error, else output that the connection was made. I'm going to add something. Woohoo. Okay, so I'm going to pause my screen sharing to update my password. Does anybody have any questions about this file before we save it? If you are using VS Code, you can just create using that same folder. You can create this file. Again, I just called it db.php and copy and paste into there. We have the save on or upload on save. So once you get this set up, it should automatically go up to your server. Okay, I'm going to pause my share. Yes, this is the workaround that if you haven't been able to use the FTP through VS Code, you can do it this way. All right, I am going to update my password. And then I'm going to click Save Changes in the top. And then I'm going to close. Okay, so here is, I'm going to refresh this page so it doesn't look like I have 0. Where is refresh? Reload. So here you
Going
go.
so fast.
I just had to put my password in. All right, so I'm going to test this out. I have my URL already up here. So what is my URL going to be for this file? I put this at public_HTML, so there shouldn't be any folders. Yeah, just db.php. And this is what you want to see. A connection was made. Woohoo. So if you get this, go ahead and put an O in the chat. If you don't get this, make sure to check that you inserted the correct values for your database, your username, and your password, and that you close that password string with the closing quote.
Well, lost.
Who is saying they're lost?
Well, because I missed a step or something because you're on Visual Studios running it. And I'm not sure what I did.
Are you doing it through Visual Studio? Or are you doing it through the cPanel file manager? So when we're
cPanel.
working with the cPanel file manager, like I said, I don't recommend this. You don't have the FTP because you're already here. This is what this is. You're basically using the FTP to create a new file. It's not as good because obviously that is literally just a text area that I'm typing code into, and it doesn't give me any of my good code hints or let me format my code nicely. So I do not recommend using this, but for the purpose of this, this is just a workaround till everybody gets set up in VS Code. I will show you for the second file that we're going to use here, how to do it in VS Code. So those of you who don't have VS Code working, you can do this in File Manager like we just did. So only 3 of you have this working?
Well, I don't know, because once I hit save, I don't know how to make it do what you did.
So you hit save, all you need to do is go to your URL then.
And my URL is
Information that was sent to you already. It's the domain name of your web server. I think it's just wendy.webdevstudent.me
okay.
/db.php. So you have to be able to take this. So this is all in our public_HTML folder. All of these things become our URLs. So any file that you make in here or any folder that you make in here will be translated to your URL. So if you named yours db.php,
It's just saying hello world, because I'm looking at the indexation.
You're not putting in the db.php in the URL.
Okay, so I gotta do what? .me and then .b? Oh, slash. Thank you.
Do you get a connection is made?
It says page is not working. Wendy web dev student.me /db.php.
Is that what you called it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well,
Okay.
continue.
All right. So next step is we want to connect to our database. So let me change my screen sharing and let me close this.
What?
All right, you guys see my VS Code, right?
So what did we do? We what, I missed something. You added which one of those folders?
What are you talking about?
You
I
have
just switched over into VS Code. That's all I've done.
Oh, it's because you have like 4 folders there, and I'm
right here in VS Code.
Yeah.
I just have yeah.
Fall 21 and okay.
This is just my folder. I only have an index.html that you're seeing in here. So I'm going to go and create a new file, and I'm going to call this one the file save as. I'm going to call this not I'm going to call this list users. List_users save as type PHP. Okay, so it should look something like this. All right. Now, what we want to do is this is going to be the first page that you're going to connect with. It should be exciting. Hold on, let me open my thing here. Okay, so the very first thing that we want to do in our file is we want to make sure that we are calling in. Hold on, let me make this bigger for you. Oops, that's too big. All right, we want to start with our PHP and end our PHP. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to get that db.php file included. But we don't want to use an include, we want to use a require, because we don't want the page to run if our database is not working. So in the event that there's any kind of weird thing happening, we just want the page to die. So we're going to do require db.php. Everybody got that so far? Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Then we are going to echo out in H1 list of website users. Everybody good so far? And now the magic begins. Are you
How do
ready?
you get the, how do you open the list user PHP again?
I just went up to file. So if you went to file, new file, and then I saved it as listusers.php.
Oh, okay.
If you can either do this through the file manager and cPanel, or you can do this in VS Code if your VS Code is working. Or, I mean, you could technically do this in VS Code and then upload it through the file manager as well. All right, here is the magic. We're going to create a variable and we're going to call it query. And we're going to create a very simple SQL statement that says select asterisk from user. It is very important that this user is exactly the way the table is named. If it is not, this is not going to work. Okay, so create a query and store to the query variable. Now that we have our query, we're going to open a DB connection and run the query. And that looks something like this. We're going to, what did I tell you the query results were returned as? Anybody remember me talking about this last week? What type of data structure is a query result? Yes, good job, Mooney. 2 stars, 2 stars. It is returned as an array.
The arrays have traumatized me, so, you know, thumbs up.
Good job, arrays. Okay, so the result is going to equal, we're going to call a function called MySQLi connection. I'm sorry, MySQLi query. I think that doesn't sound right. And in it, we are going to pass our query and the name of our connection. So I need to first double check what we called our connection. That is in our db.php file. And it looks like we called it connection. Okay, good. I just wanted to double check. So here we are going to pass this function connection, which is coming from our db.php file, and we're going to pass the query. Okay, so this connection variable is the configuration for all of that. It has all the configuration for our database, and that's being sent. And then the query variable is just sending the select asterisk from user. Okay, we're good so far. So ideally, this will run and it will produce a, oops, I got to put a semicolon in there. It will send us back a an array with our, how many records is going to be returned from that query?
5.
If you have 5 in your database table, you should see 5 right here. All right, so this is what we're going to do. We are going to create a while statement. Okay, so this is going to say while row equals MySQLi fetch ASSOC. This is a little strange at first. Okay. While row equals, so this is another function that says it's going to, oh, it tells us right here. It's going to return an associative array of strings representing the fetched row in the result set, where each key in the array represents the name of one of the result set's columns, or null if there are no more rows in the result set. So this is why, isn't this handy? Even as a link to the PHP thing. So this is why using something like VS Code is helpful, because it gives us, it tells us exactly how to use this, and even shows result, because that is typically what people name the result when they run this. Okay, so while, make sure you have 1 parenthesis there and 1 parenthesis at the function, and then 2 closing parentheses. Then we have our curly brackets for our code block here. So we're going to echo our, we are good. Let's do a paragraph. E, and then concatenate it with row. That's going to be our array. User ID. Now, again, if you didn't make your field names the same as mine, you're going to need to make sure that whatever you named your field names is how you're representing this here. All right, so I've got my user ID and let's see. My, what do I have here? First name. And I should probably put this in a table, trying to avoid all of that, but we'll see what this looks like. Last name, and then we'll just put our email address in here. All right, so you see here that we are referencing the field names in the order that we want it to be printed of our row array. So when we get to the end here, we've got to close this with a closing paragraph and then our semicolon. So it should look something like that. Does that look good to everybody? So ideally, this is going to print how many times? Are you guys still with me? Oh, I need spaces. Oh, thank you. I knew I was missing something. Let me put my spaces in here. Just gonna make me, you know, there's probably an easier way to do this, right? Without all these things here. Okay, space, space, space. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, and because my FTP is set up, this should work. Let me go back to my page here and share my file. Okay, this is the moment of truth. So what did I call that? List underscore users dot PHP. And I'm seeing the little thing for my required, a connection made, woohoo, and I'm seeing all of my website users. Isn't that very exciting?